Welcome to the Center Collaborative, Creative Solutions in Behavioral Health and Criminal Justice, brought to you by the Oregon Center on Behavioral Health and Justice Integration, which is also known as the Center. We at the Center are all about solutions. Our job in Oregon is to facilitate improvement of the system so behavioral health and criminal justice can work better together to engage people in treatment while promoting public safety. I am your host, Chris Thomas. I hold a master's degree in clinical psychology and have focused on the intersection between behavioral health and criminal justice for 20 years. Over 7 of those years were behind the walls of a maximum security prison. During this podcast, you will have the opportunity to sit in on real, in-depth conversations with experts about complex topics in a way that is both fascinating and digestible. We will focus not just on what is wrong with the system, but what is going right and how we can work together to evolve. This podcast is a conversation in a series of conversations where we touch on people's legal rights and their options related to seeking medical care. Since our conversations are intended for informational and educational purposes only, they are not a substitute for or a reason to delay seeking professional legal or medical advice. On today's episode, we have with us Kailee Evans, Oregon Department of Corrections lead correctional counselor, team lead for the peer support team, and CIT coordinator for High Desert CIT. Kailee and I talk about the adaptation of Memphis Model CIT to a correctional environment and how well this fits in with DOC's initiative, The Oregon Way, which centers rehabilitation, accountability, naturalization, and humanization of adults in custody. We also talk about how CIT supports staff wellness and how important this is, particularly within a correctional environment. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Kailee. I think you will too. Welcome to our conversation. Kailee, welcome to the program. I am thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Sometimes people wonder, how do we get to the jobs that we get to? Would you like to share your journey with how you got to where you are now with our listening audience?
Sure. I know that a lot of us in corrections didn't start out thinking that they would end up working in prison or with adults in custody. My story was I went to school to be an elementary teacher, and that's where my career path started out of college. And so I was an elementary teacher for a few years. And then I got married and moved, and that's when the economy was crashing. And the budgets for schools also crashed pretty significantly. And where I moved, they had shut down 2 schools, and they're like, yeah, we don't have any teaching jobs here. So I got into banking for 5 years, and then we moved over this way. So the prison I work at is in Ontario, Oregon. It's the largest institution in the state. We have 3,000 adults in custody and close to 1,000 employees here. It's one of the major employers in this area. So I literally just saw like a office support job pop up online. And I was like, hey, that looks like it has great benefits and a good place to work. So I put in for it. And when we moved over to this area, I had no idea what I was getting into. I'd never been in a prison in my life. And ended up getting the receptionist job up front and did that for about 6 months to a year. And then I ended up doing office support jobs throughout the prison and started to find out that my teaching experience, especially working with kids with IEP plans and casework, qualified me to look into correctional counseling. I had no idea what a correctional counselor was, so I learned all about that. And I started out here about 10 years ago. Gosh, I can't believe it's been 10 years in February. We use our dates a lot. I'm sure, as you know, Chris, yeah, my anniversary is coming up. I'll be here 10 years, so a full decade out at Snake River. And I've actually really enjoyed it. It's been great. I've learned so much, and I've loved working with people here. So it's been great.
You are coming up on your 2nd star on your name tag.
I am, yeah. I have my 1 star, got my double star on its way. So I'm moving on up in the world.
And for our listening audience, stars are milestones. So you get a star for every 5 years. So the 2nd star is a big deal.
I'll hit my 2nd, and hopefully I'll be here until about 4th star. and go from there.
So your pathway into a correctional counselor, I can absolutely see how that happened. How did you end up being the coordinator for CIT? I know it's a passion of yours. So how did you end up doing that and finding your passion in that?
That's also a funny story. Reg Medford and Becky Woolery started up the crisis intervention training in our community close to about 10 years ago now. They are amazing. They did all the groundwork, and people don't know setting up a crisis intervention team program in your area, especially in a rural community, takes a lot of work. I attended one of the trainings because I am in the CISM team, or crisis intervention stress management team. So I went to the 40-hour community course because we saw, oh, law enforcement professionals, this is a great course to go to. I was one of the first classes to go through. And I'm going through this course and I'm like, man, this is great stuff. I'm loving this. I really loved how the training was set up. I loved the people involved. I really liked the community aspect, finding resources and making sure that we were helping law enforcement get the help they needed for themselves, as well as the people that they're working with. So I just really loved everything about it, especially the hands-on experience that you get in the scenario where you're testing out your skills you learned. And I've been through a lot of training in my day. Again, I come from an education background, and I'm like, this is excellent. We need this. More people need this where I work. So that's when I got involved. I started teaching some of the breakout sessions. Obviously, corrections work is a little different from some of the community work. So when we talk about liability, when we talk about use of force, even, it's going to be different. We're going to talk about different types of things in a correctional environment. So I started helping with that a little bit, and then slowly just became part of the planning committee. So now I get to help plan the community trainings with another coordinator, Kailee, that works with the deputy's office. It's great to have her in the community. So yeah, that's how I got involved.
We've talked about CIT a little bit on this podcast, but I always like to refresh folks on
Sure.
what it is because there's different types of CIT. And we
Yeah.
always like to talk about how it's not just the training, it's the
Yes.
program, it's bringing the community together. And you all started something special over in your community with High Desert and started a corrections CIT. So
Yes.
I'm wondering, can you give an explanation of what Memphis Model CIT looks like for the community and then how you had to tweak that a little bit for corrections? What looks
Sure.
different?
And there's actually a CIT international organization now, CIT being used all over the world. There's been nations that have asked people to come and show them what a crisis intervention team is. And that's exactly what it is. It's a crisis intervention team. A lot of training is linked to it. So where it started was in Memphis back in the late 80s. There was a situation where a person with schizophrenia had a knife, and law enforcement showed up. And unfortunately, the situation ended with the person with mental health issues getting shot and killed as a result of the process. The city started looking into how they dealt with mental health in the community, and they noticed that there was a huge shortcoming when it came to resources and helping people get the help they needed. And so that's where it all started. The department in Memphis asked for help. They asked for, I believe, a psychologist, either a psychiatrist or a psychologist, to come and help them start giving more training to their law enforcement staff. And that's where it started. Now, over 30 years later, that's spread all across the nation and the world to crisis intervention teams. In Oregon alone, we have crisis intervention teams for almost every county in Oregon now, many thanks to the area that Chris works for. They help the crisis intervention teams across the state stay up and going and help get them resources. And now we have one in almost every county, so it's accessible to almost every area in our state, which is fantastic. Chris was talking about corrections-based CIT. When I started getting involved, I started sending all of our team members to CIT. I'm like, man, we need all of our peer support team members to go through this. The department has also been doing a huge push for more normalization and humanization with the adults in custody, but as well for our staff. And so we also had some really exciting things going on here where we had a resource team in our special housing, which I can maybe talk about a little bit more later. But they were trying some new things with maybe the AICs that are more assaultive or harder to place in a general population, which is out of, a lot of people used to call it the whole, or we call it special housing. So anyway, they were looking for more training. They were looking for more resources. We have over 1,000 employees here. So we started seeing a need for more staff to go through a crisis intervention team training so we could start having more support for our staff and different ways to respond to our AICs, especially those with mental health, and different ways we could react, communicate, or actively listen to them to help de-escalate. The first goal is safety, obviously. And then we're looking at reducing the use of force if we can. Obviously, that sometimes that's still necessary. And then also using those community resources in the prison. We're looking at utilizing our resources that we have here and all working together in a cohesive way to, again, give the best care possible to the people that we're working with.
I don't think that most people know that Oregon institutions, Oregon DOC is
Mhm.
very different than a lot of the country. And that CIT fits in beautifully with the Oregon way and the
Yeah,
philosophy that the Department of Corrections has around working with adults in custody. I'm
right.
wondering if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure, I can. I'm definitely not an expert by any means, but I am a big proponent of the Oregon Way. The Oregon Way has resulted because we've had an amazing opportunity with the Oregon Department of Corrections to have a partnership with some prisons in Norway. They were doing some really progressive things in Norway to make prison more humane. So you are basically preparing people in custody for getting back out into their communities and being successful in the long run. So they were doing some really unique things. There was actually a big grant that occurred, and we started sending over groups of people from Oregon Department of Corrections to Norway. So they got to travel over there multiple times and look and see what they're doing, walk around their prisons, walk with their staff. I think they even stayed with the staff over there. And then they ended up coming back here, and people from Norway also visited here. So it was really neat because they were able to see some things that Norway was doing. And obviously, there's some cultural things that will be different, and there's some differences in population alone. Norway is a much smaller country than United States. I know a lot of the people that went, and they had nothing but really positive things to say about what they learned. What Oregon's done is come up with the Oregon Way. The goal is more humanization and normalization. So the people we're working with, even though they're incarcerated, we still want to remember the human part of that. The more they're treated like human beings, and the more they feel as if we're here to help rather than to punish, because the punishment's already happened, right? The punishment happened when they received their sentence, when they went through the courts. So that happened before they got here. Really, what we focus on in Oregon is that rehabilitation piece. There's also something called the Oregon Accountability Model, and it ties in with the Oregon Way. And so what that is that we try to incorporate every staff member in the entire department. We are trying to provide prosocial ways to help the adults in custody learn how to be more prosocial. So we want to model prosocial behavior. The research showed over time was the more our staff are taking care of themselves, the better we're going to provide that prosocial behavior for the adults in custody. There's a lot that goes into it, and there's been a lot of initiatives along the way, but it's been really neat over the last 10 years, because that's how long I've been here, just to see the changes in place. We've really tried to reduce the length of time people spend in special housing, which is a more isolated environment when they get in trouble while they're here. We've also tried to provide more programming for the adults in custody. We've tried to do huge initiatives towards staff wellness, because again, we found the more staff are taken care of and healthier, the more we respond in a healthy way when we have somebody that's in crisis. So there's been a lot that goes into it, but it's been really exciting. And I know Chris was here at the beginnings of some of that, and it's been really cool to be a part of and to see some of the change involved in that, but also looking ahead. And there's so much that we have to aspire to, and to be a part of that's been really neat.
I think what the broader community sometimes doesn't know is that a majority of folks who are incarcerated in a prison environment get back out. I think it's 99%
Yeah.
get back out again. So the
Yeah.
more time that is spent in rehabilitation and
Hmm.
normalization, the better neighbors that folks are going to be when they return to the community. And that's what we really
Exactly.
want, right? We don't want them to go somewhere for it to get worse. We want them to go somewhere
Right.
and be better neighbors when they get back out. And I've always loved that focus in Oregon around what happens when someone returns to the community. And this isn't a place for punishment. And I think that's unique in the zeitgeist of what people
Yeah.
think of when they think of corrections, right? That's not what people think of. And so I love being able to talk about that
Yeah.
in Oregon.
And accountability is still a huge piece of our model. So that doesn't mean that people that have negative behavior aren't held accountable for their actions. That's a huge piece of what we do. And the road to prosocial behavior also includes taking responsibility and learning how to move ahead and make changes in your behavior cognitively and behaviorally. So that doesn't mean that they're not held accountable. They're still separated from their families. There's still some really hard stuff with prisons. So I think sometimes people look at Oregon and you hear things like, oh, they get to go there and it's better than staying in a hotel. And I guess I would say to them, well, most people get to leave the hotel and go home later. It is tough because it's people's tax dollars. And so people want to see things being used responsibly. Like what you're saying, Chris, do we want to have people come back that are ready to be prosocial, safe, and productive in their communities? So that's really the goal. And that's what our hope is by focusing more on the human instead of just the behavior.
Absolutely. The other piece I love about the growing edge in Oregon DOC is the focus on staff wellness. I think most folks don't know that law enforcement itself has pretty dismal numbers when it comes to suicide
Yeah.
and early death, even without suicide. Corrections has the absolute worse. The
Yeah.
average is death after 3 years after retirement, which is 58 or 59 years of age.
Mhm.
I've buried a fair amount of friends. I'm sure that you've buried your share too. And so the more that the department focuses on making institutions a positive environment for correction staff, not only are correction staff better able to do their jobs, but it really pays off in the long run for correction staffs and the way that they're able to live their lives. Because working in an
Yeah.
institution, it's a lot. It's
Yeah.
a lot.
You're right. And the numbers look really bad. I do some of the new hire training. We're up there trying to encourage them, but you're also having to be honest and being like the importance of taking care of yourself. Because, yeah, the statistics do show that correctional officers have an average lifespan of 58 and a half. So it really does fire me up, especially being lead of the peer support team, just how essential it is for self care, just that wear and tear. And we actually have a higher likelihood of PTSD working in corrections than combat veterans and law enforcement on the streets. That's what the most recent data is showing. So that's staggering. And a lot of it is that hypervigilance when you're in here because you just never know when something's going to happen. Dr. Kevin Gilmartin, he talks about hypervigilance a lot, and he's come here multiple times. He talks about while you're working in law enforcement. Basically, your hypervigilance stops dipping down to normal. So you're always at this high level of hypervigilance, and your body isn't meant to do that. So that's when you see it start affecting people long term. When we're talking about peer support, we see long-term stress injuries, or we see things happen with our mental health, or we see staff that are normally great employees that are really dependable, showing up on time, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of issues. When you work here, you become friends with the people you work with, and when you see people you care about struggling with their health and passing away way too young, it gets you pretty motivated to help others. And so I'm super thankful. Oregon Department of Corrections, they added it in policy to have peer support teams at every single institution. And it's to be one peer supporter for every 40 people. So here we have about 26 of us. That alone is really cutting edge to have peer support for your entire state and have it in policy. We've had a lot of other places asking us how we've done that and how to do that and train people. We all go to CISM training, which that's another story, but that's at least 72 hours of training to respond to somebody in crisis. I'm thankful for the Oregon Department of Corrections and the emphasis that they put on staff wellness, and I'm hoping we can reduce those statistics here in Oregon.
Kailee, could you talk a little bit about peer support and what that looks like? Because I
Sure.
think most people aren't familiar with it.
Yeah. So You'll hear peer support mentioned in a lot of different realms. Sometimes you'll hear it, you're talking about alcohol and drug recovery. Law enforcement peer support is basically a peer that's been trained to respond to other staff when they're going through crisis. We use the CISM model here, critical incident stress management, and that's also a national organization and training. And so we all go through the same training across the state. And we are trained to respond to staff one-on-one. So when a person's going through an individual crisis, and we're also trained to respond to group crisis, which sometimes means doing something called a CISM debriefing less than a week after the incident occurs. And in a confidential setting, we go through what happened in the incident and actually have a 7-step process to talk through what happened and talk about stress reactions and try to normalize those. Because a lot of times something big will happen and people don't know why their body is responding. Why can't I sleep anymore? Or why is my stomach upset all the time? That's a huge thing in law enforcement. And we think we're the only one until we sit down and we share our experiences. So it can be hugely impactful to hear somebody else that was part of the same incident be like, yeah, I'm having that too. Like, I thought I was the only one as well. And you can encourage each other. And then what we're also trained to do is refer people to professional resources. So none of us are clinical counselors. We're all just peers who have had some training in how to help somebody when they're in the midst of a crisis. And we're trained to follow up with those individuals. We're also confidential. So we're covered under Oregon law. We're mandatory reporters. So we would have to report if somebody was saying they were going to harm themselves or someone else. But other than that, we're covered by law to keep any other conversation of peer support confidential. So even if we were called to court, that's a confidential conversation and we're covered by law. So that really helps staff trust. They can talk confidentially and they know it's not going to go anywhere. And then we have something else called a diffusing where maybe we'll just meet with a small group of people after a smaller incident. And again, we're checking in on them. We're letting them know that peer support's available, that if you want to talk about it later, if it's still bothering you, or here's some stress reactions you might have. That's normal. That's totally fine if you're having some of those things happen. If they're lingering for a couple months, they'll come and talk to me again. Maybe we should look at some resources for you. Let's call our EAP program, our Employee Assistance Program, and we help refer people to professional counseling and even suggest that look at our insurance for medical things. They have something else going on. It's very rewarding. Our team is amazing. I love my team. They are so great at checking in on other staff. They truly care about the people they work with, and they're so good at keeping things confidential. We don't even tell each other what people tell us unless they have specific permission from the other person. CIT has been such a great thing for us because it's just another way for us to connect with people that are doing similar things, right? Because we're connecting to the actual staff in crisis, but we can also use those skills with connecting with AICs in crisis and helping them. I've used CIT skills in the community. I've used them at church. I love the practicality of it. And people go into crisis. They don't choose usually when they go into crisis. So you can be anywhere. It can be at Walmart. You need to use those skills I learned at CIT. So that's been awesome to have that extra level of support from CIT with what we do here.
People usually don't go into crisis when it's scheduled or convenient or expected.
Absolutely.
First of all, I just have to say, before we move on, I love you sharing the stories around peer support and the debriefs. The old school model was suck it up.
Yep.
Go through it.
Buttercup, get back up there.
Yep.
You're fine.
You're fine.
Is everyone good? You want to talk to peer support? Nope, you're good. Okay, get back in there.
Exactly. There's so much stigma around it. And what I love is the change in the culture and how you all are leading that and thinking about how to interact with people differently. But the other piece I love about it is corrections is tight knit.
Yes.
And knowing that what folks are going to say is going to be confidential and won't go anywhere because it is so tight knit. There's always that fear. But then also you're talking to people who get you because working in a correctional environment, it is not like any other environment. And so having someone that you can actually like talk to about the stuff that's really different and getting to you and doing that in a very frank way is just so refreshing. And so I'm thrilled to hear about how much the model has expanded.
Yeah, it's been amazing to look at all the work that went into it even before I started working here. It was like 20 years ago that I think they started peer support, which was super cutting edge 20 years ago. So kudos to those who have worked in DOC that thought of that and made that a priority. and took the time to get it into policy so everyone could have that.
Absolutely. I know I definitely used my peer support specialists back in the day, and so I'm thrilled to hear that it's expanding.
I've used people on my team myself, so I trust them very much.
We helpers need other helpers that we can ask for help, and it needs to be okay. And
Yeah.
we're all dealing with that struggle. The helpers have a hard time asking for help.
Yes. All the teams were required to do 32 hours of training a year as a team. Here we do quarterly trainings, and at the beginning of each training, we spend a good chunk of time, usually over an hour, just doing a wellness check with the whole team. And so everybody reports out how they're doing, whether they want to do a number scale or explain a little bit more. And then we also talk about some ways we can maybe get to the next number and be there as a support for each other. Because you're totally right. Like, the helpers are the ones always running to help other people. And then all of a sudden you get to a point when's the last time I helped myself or asked for help and we just tend to do that to ourselves. So it's so important that we're self-aware. And I know for myself, I've had to analyze, you know what? I'm snapping at people a little more lately. I need to make sure that I'm taking care of myself or planning a vacation so I can keep helping others and I'm not getting to a place where I'm unable to help someone else. So yeah, it's super important.
Yep. It's like the airplane with the oxygen mask, right? You're
Yep,
supposed to put it on your own face before somebody else's.
absolutely.
Do you have some stories around where folks were able to use CIT and they were able to reflect on, wow, this would have been really different if I hadn't had these skills to utilize?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the greatest stories I have so far about the impact of crisis intervention team and the training that people have gone through is the very first correction CIT we ever did was entirely a group of sergeants. And most had been here at least 20 years. And they came in and they're like, what am I doing here? Why am I at this training? I've been to every training imaginable. And they were not super pleased to be there. We also told them, hey, we're learning how to do a correction CIT. So thanks for being here and helping us figure this out. So there were definitely some learning thrusts along the way as we were developing the CIT curriculum, making sure that we were being effective with even the types of speakers you bring in. Because when you bring in somebody that maybe doesn't have any understanding of a correctional environment, you might get some pushback from the class. Yeah, so we definitely learned some things. But my favorite thing out of that was a few months down the road, one of the sergeants, he came up to me and he goes, you'll never believe this. I used that stuff that we learned at CIT. That stuff works. I didn't have to call a response team and he calmed down right away. And all I did was say, oh, you must be really frustrated. And he just was like, yeah, I am frustrated. And then he stopped. But then he started telling the other guys, hey, remember that thing? Like, you guys, this is good stuff. Like, it's actually working. And it was just really neat to see somebody that was pretty set in their ways, that was pretty like, yeah, I'm never going to use this. So just having that aspect, seeing somebody that truly does want to help and having those extra skills in play, it, first of all, helped him feel really good. He had some things in his tool belt to use that wasn't just calling a response team. He didn't have to do any of that. And it was just a really positive thing for him. So that was great. I think my other favorite things out of CIT, and yeah, it makes me emotional even thinking about it because I've always had someone come up to me at the end and realize that they want to seek out some self care or looking into some options with a professional. And that to me is worth any amount of work and time to put together correction classes because, again, we're talking about that wellness piece and having that self realization like, I'm what they're talking about right now. I'm getting to that wear and tear mode and I need to get some help. And I'll tell you, we've done, I think, 5 of these now. And I've had at least 1, 2, 3 people come and share with me afterward that they've started seeking out some help for themselves. And they come and tell me about it later. I think it's been close to a life-saving measure in some cases for some to be able to provide some self-care for themselves. So that alone is completely worth it to me to continue putting in the work to do these.
I love both of those stories. The first one, you have no better advertisement than a sergeant who now
Right.
know what works.
Yep.
No better advertisement for CIT at that point. And it was funny when I was hearing the story, I could hear it in my head. There's sergeants I know. I was like, "Oh, man, I know that guy." And I love that. I love that so much, how much that sergeant was a little skeptical, but tried it
Yeah.
and then went, "Oh my gosh, this works," and is telling everybody else how that works, and that's gold. That is advertisement gold.
Well, it's so great when it all clicks because I've learned so much from them, like basic security practices, things we need to be aware of, knowing how to stay safe when you're here. And I'm so thankful for all those guys. I love the security mindedness, but having the security mindedness collide with CIT and seeing the impact on that staff member and probably on a lot of AICs that they're dealing with and their career potentially, it's really rewarding to see those things collide and see positive interactions out of that.
Absolutely. That security mindedness, that's required. It can be quite the environment. Safety and security is always at the forefront and should
Yes.
always be at the forefront. And that wears on you. So it's wonderful to be able to have additional tools in your
Yes.
toolbox.
Because the department provides excellent training. We give our staff a lot more training than many other states do. They really are cutting edge. Our PDU department's amazing, and I worked with a lot of them before. So because we're providing CIT does not mean that they're not doing an adequate job. It's just, like you said, an extra tool that can go along with all the stuff that they're already teaching and a good refresher. Because especially when you've been here 5-10 years, you've already been through all of your initial training, through some in-service classes, and then just something on top of that where you can really hone in on some specific things that might be helpful in your career. So yeah, it's been great to see all those things work together.
Absolutely. And when you've been there for a while, the environment starts to wear on you. And I wonder if CIT is more helpful. It's like a refresher once you have context. You have all this great training from the department, and then you've been there for a while, and there's still great training.
Right.
But then you have context for what
Yeah.
you're learning, and then it clicks more versus when
Right.
you're fresh out of the academy, you don't have any context for what you're being
Right.
taught.
Exactly. And it's really cool also the more people that go through CIT and they're on the crisis intervention team, basically, when they're done, right? There starts to be that camaraderie. Oh, you've been through it too. Those of you that don't know much about crisis intervention training, the last day you go through scenario and you have to walk in on rooms where you don't know what you're walking into and you use the skills you've learned throughout the week to deal with these situations. And we're not very nice. We give some tough situations to people that have been through CIT. When we write ours over here, we use real life situations that we've either heard about or been involved in. Most of the ones I've written, I've been involved in. And we have actors that come in and act out the scenarios. So it's pretty intense. You don't just do one, you do like rounds. So you walk into it. Usually we have at least 12 different scenarios that each person that goes through CIT completes. Yeah, you have that camaraderie. You're like, oh, you did it too. Oh, you had to walk into those rooms and use those skills. And then when stuff goes down here, when something hard happens here, you're like, oh, I have some people here that might be able to help me, especially when it comes to somebody in crisis. We have over 100 people in Snake River and Powder River, which is a minimum in Baker City, that have all been through CIT. So we're starting to increase our numbers over here, which is great.
I love it. I love it. And just like the hard skills, the soft skills need
Yep.
practice too, right? It's not just about the nuts and bolts, it's about those soft skills and continuously practicing those so you get better. And it becomes,
Right.
I guess, brain muscle memory versus
Yes.
body muscle memory.
Yeah, and a camaraderie. We also send corrections to our community training. So we'll have anywhere from a police chief to a captain in corrections to sometimes a firefighter to see all of them work together in these situations and develop that camaraderie and that team atmosphere has just been really rewarding to see in our community, just seeing everybody work together to provide the best possible care to those in our communities that are struggling.
I'm wondering, Kaylee, if you want to talk a little bit more about what people learn in CIT. So, when you say they're
Sure.
practicing the skills, and we know it's part of being connected to the community, but what kind of topics are you covering in CIT trainings?
Sure. CIT, it's a 40-hour training. Like we've been talking about, it's more than that. It's a team ongoing where we're connecting people together and to other resources in the community. A lot of the training focuses on learning about mental health and mental illness. And we usually have, I know Our last one we did in October, we had over 30 different instructors or presenters coming in from all over. We have a NAMI presentation or sometimes multiple. And NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And they have been with CIT since the beginning from the Memphis model. And so this time we actually had a retired police officer from California was part of NAMI. And so he came and shared his story. So NAMI sends presenters and they actually share their own mental health stories and they share the process and how maybe they reached out and got help, whether it's medication or counseling, and they are really open and raw about it. And we've also had people share personal stories. So you can personalize people that have struggled with mental health because it's so stigmatized still. And I think that's one of the biggest parts of CIT is learning more about it. You're not going to be a professional QMHP, qualified mental health professional when you're done with CIT, but you'll have a much bigger understanding of mental illness, types of mental illness that you might run into, especially in law enforcement. There's a lot of courses that deal with how to talk to somebody maybe that's suicidal, that's in crisis. De-escalation is a huge part of the training. We'll talk about what de-escalation is, ways to do it verbally, ways to even carry yourself, how you're coming across. We usually use a lot of the FBI-based training for that, a lot of the active listening skills. We talk about that a lot throughout the week. And we talk about PTSD, talk about veteran aspects. In the community trainings, we bring in resources from all over the communities. So whether maybe it's DHS, maybe it's a nonprofit organization that provides coats to people that need coats. So it helps give a person the resources available. What's really cool about High Desert CIT is that we have Lifeways involved, and they're a big mental health provider in the area. But we also have other mental health providers on our team. So we have independent ones, like I talked about Becky Woolery earlier that helped start up CIT. She has her own insight counseling. We also have altruistic counseling, and the person who started that is also on our team. And so it's really cool because we're all working together for a common goal to try to provide people more education on what mental illness is and how to respond to it in simple ways that we can help somebody that's in crisis or that might be having a mental health episode or maybe an ongoing mental health crisis. We talk about mental illness in the elderly. We talk about cultural awareness. We also talk about the crisis cycle. We do a really cool psychosis exercise. That's one of my favorites, where we try to develop a better understanding for those that may be hearing voices or having hallucinations. We talk about what treatment looks like for people and why sometimes that can be hard for them. We usually start out the week by giving everybody a pill box, and they're fake diagnosed with something, and they have to take their quote unquote meds, which is candy, but they have to put all their candy in the pill box and pretend like they're having to take meds for a diagnosis. And it helps create more empathy. So empathy is a big thing in CIT. So you're having a better understanding of what maybe this person is going through. Because sometimes it's not that they don't want help. Sometimes it's that they can't find it, or they truly aren't able to use a pill box and figure out what time to take their meds 7 times a day. We talk about addictive disorders and drug situations and how to maybe differentiate whether it's drugs or mental health or both. So yeah, there's a lot throughout the week. It's intense. There's a lot of information, but I have rarely had somebody go through CIT and say that they wouldn't want others to go through it as well, because I think it's super beneficial and it helps them in what they do every day.
When myself and another one of my team members had a chance to come out to your CIT, and we were so thankful that you hosted us this summer and let us come out.
So fun.
It was so much fun. We both have backgrounds as therapists,
Mm-hmm.
and we learned a lot. We
That's
talk about it
awesome.
still, what we learned, right? There is so much rich content for not only just the educational piece of it, but then you get to practice skills and you get to think about things in a different way. And the empathy exercises and also hearing from the voices of lived experience, I think, are so important, because I think
Yes.
people forget what it's like. I mean, I know that we weren't very good about taking our pills. We weren't very good about it.
I remember to take my vitamins. So that's super impressive to me if somebody can remember to take pills multiple times a day at certain times and eating certain things. So yeah, that was a big eye opener for me when I went through the course. I was like, man, I can see how this would be a hard thing to manage. And we have a lot of fun. We do a lot of hands-on activities. It's not just sitting in class all week. So I think that's one thing that's unique to crisis intervention team training is that we do a lot of activities together, a lot of discussion, a lot of learning from each other. We almost always have from the therapy side there as well at the training. So we have law enforcement sharing their perspective, as well as those that are therapists or those that are clinical working with people in the community. So it's great. I developed huge respect for people that are working in the community and Oregon State Police and just being able to hear their experiences. And it's a really cool bonding experience with other people in law enforcement as well as those working in mental health. So that's another really neat aspect of it.
Well, and that's the beautiful community part of it, right? Is that it's not just for law enforcement. And lots of people think it is, that it's just for law enforcement.
Right.
But it's not. It's for multiple first responders within the community. And it's a way to build that bigger part of it outside of the training where it is about the team, not
Yeah.
just about the training.
Yeah, and it's great. Now I have people I can call all over the state and all over the county. If I have a question about something, I just bring up my resources and I have all these people I now know personally that I can ask a question or, hey, I have this going on, or I'm working with somebody that needs help in this area. It's so great to have those connections because Malheur County is the poorest county in Oregon when you look at socioeconomic statuses. And so, as you can imagine, there's a huge need. And so, knowing where your resources are here is hugely beneficial to being able to help somebody that's struggling.
And CIT is also this beautiful base of all this other work that can happen in the community. When it was our first season, Coos County came on and talked about the arc of when their CIT
Yeah,
program started. And now their CIT program is the basis for a lot of the other projects that they do in this intersection of behavioral health and criminal justice. So it's a
cool.
rich ground for being able to work with one another and get stuff done.
Yeah, and in the communities, you have the jail diversion programs. And I didn't know anything about that. In corrections, we don't really see that side of things. So that was great for me to be a part of too, have a better understanding of before they even get here, maybe there's some things we can do to prevent people from ever getting to where I work. It's really neat to have those connections and to see what other people are doing. And I got to meet some of the people from Coos County recently at our Sitco Summit. So that was fun.
Yes, they were there. That was fun. Then I got to see all these folks that had become on the podcast or I'd known for the number of years and I haven't had a chance to see. That was lovely to actually see people in person again.
For sure. Yeah,
So
it's a fun group of people.
it's another fantastic community of
Mhm.
folks that you can call upon when you get stuck.
Yep, absolutely.
So in the time that we have left, I'm wondering if there's anything that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure that we hit upon.
I love everything about CIT, and I think it just goes along so well with the department and the goals that we're moving toward. And I'm just so thankful to be a part of the solution and part of moving forward with the really positive things that we're doing. Any little piece I can be part of in that, I'm excited to do that.
It dovetails so beautifully with the philosophy of the department, which back in the day when I worked for the department was cutting edge in the country. And Oregon has continued to evolve, has not just sat back on its laurels, but has continued to evolve.
Right?
And how CIT fits in so beautifully with that and the added support that can provide for staff for more tools as they go through their careers. Also, the peer support work that you're doing and how that has evolved within corrections. Just so many exciting opportunities and evolutions within the world of corrections that I don't think people really get to hear about. They just hear about
Right.
the not so great stuff and don't get to hear about how really cutting edge Oregon is and how Oregon DOC is always looking to improve.
Yeah, I can't brag enough about the people I work with. The job they do every day is just incredible. And the attitudes and the focus on helping adults in custody get the help they need and being prosocial and trying to make this environment as conducive to learning as possible and rehabilitation. It truly is amazing what people are doing. And I agree. It is easy to look at some of the negative things, and there's always going to be negative things, and same kind of thing in law enforcement in general. You do see some negative things, but there's so many positive things going on and there's so many initiatives that are happening. I'm happy to be part of the positive and part of the stuff going on, and I'm excited to see where we go from here.
Agreed. I think that is a beautiful place for us to end, Kailee.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure to have you on the podcast, and I'm so excited to have someone from DOC as a guest,
Yeah,
have
I'm
you as a
excited to be
guest.
here. I was stoked to be able to represent and talk about what we're doing. And obviously CIT is a passion of mine and something that I'm hoping that we can provide for more and more people in the department. So it's exciting. We've had amazing people, and all of this is on top of our regular jobs. Just amazing that people are that dedicated and that this is such an important thing. They're willing to put in the time and effort to provide this for our community and for our people.
I think that's an awesome reminder that your job, your 40 hours a job, is lead correctional counselor, and then
Yeah.
you're doing CIT coordinator on top of that, and you're doing peer support on top of that. That's a lot of passion for the good.
Yeah. It all ties together really well. And I'm super thankful. Our administrators are very supportive of all of these things, and we couldn't do it without the support from them. So that's been amazing to have that support and then to see the importance of this and to also care about taking care of our staff and helping with this. So that's been amazing as well.
Culture change doesn't happen unless it's supported from the top.
Yes, absolutely. And we have that support, and I can't say enough how thankful I am for that.
The Center Collaborative is a production of the Oregon Center on Behavioral Health and Justice Integration, a specialized division of Greater Oregon Behavioral Health Incorporated. It is produced by me, Chris Thomas, with production assistance from Patrick Kennedy. Music by Pat Mulvihill and Patrick Kennedy. Subscribe to the Center Perspective using your favorite app. To learn more about criminal justice and behavioral health integration in Oregon, visit the Center's website at ocbhji.org. You can also find us on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us. Join us next time as we chat with the experts about programs and partnerships that work within this complex and yet compelling field. Thank you for joining our conversation.